Well, hello, and this is Chapter 8, the first lesson, Energy and Life. Our goal is to identify the reactants, products, and basic functions of photosynthesis, and also to connect the role of ATP to energy transfer within the cell. Cute little far side there. The girls are attracted to the smart guys. Go FAU High. All right, so our objectives are to describe the role of ATP in cellular energy and explain where plants get the energy they need to produce food. That objective 2 is just going to be a very brief overview. We'll get more into photosynthesis later. All right, let's think about them. Homeostasis, maintaining the inner balance, is hard work. Organisms and the cells within them have to grow and develop, move materials around, build new molecules, and respond to environmental changes. So what powers so much activity, and where does that power come from? So our first objective was to describe the role of ATP in cellular activity. It gives you a little clue where that power comes from, doesn't it? ATP. Let's review quickly. Energy is the ability to do work. Your cells are busy using energy to build new molecules, contract muscles, and carry out active transport. Without the ability to obtain and use energy, life would cease to exist. One of the most important compounds that cells use to store and release energy is adenosine triphosphate. ATP consists of an adenine, 5-carbon sugar called ribose, and 3 phosphate groups. Adenosine diphosphate, all right, has 2 phosphates, looks almost like ATP, except that it only has 2 phosphate groups instead of 3. ADP contains some energy, but not as much as ATP. You can liken it to it like a little flashlight with a very dim light. Okay? So when a cell has energy available, it can store small amounts of it by adding a phosphate group to the ADP and produce ATP. And wow, ADP is like a rechargeable battery that powers the machinery of the cell. Lots of energy. Cells can release the energy stored in the ATP by breaking the bonds, right here, between the second and third phosphate group. Because a cell can add or subtract these phosphate groups, it has an efficient way of storing and releasing energy as needed. One way cells use the energy provided by ATP is to carry out active transport, as we learned in the previous lessons. Many cell membranes contain sodium-potassium pumps. Sodium-potassium pumps. ATP provides the energy that keeps these pumps working. Here comes the ATP, one pops off, and it gives the energy to the pump. One of the potassium popped off. So by doing this, they're maintaining a balance of ions on both of the inside and outside of the cells. And there's a quick video here. Let's take a quick look at this video.
The sodium-potassium pump is an active transport mechanism. 3 sodium ions bind to the protein channel, and an ATP provides the energy to change the shape of the channel that in turn drives the ions through the channel. 1 phosphate group from the ATP remains bound with the channel. The sodium ions are released on the other side of the membrane outside of the cell, and the new shape of the channel has a high affinity for potassium ions, and 2 of these ions now bind to the channel. This binding again causes a change in the shape of the protein channel, and this conformational change releases the phosphate group on the cytoplasm side. This release allows the channel to revert to its original shape, and as a result, the potassium ions are released inside the cell. In its original shape, the channel has a high affinity for sodium ions, and when these ions bind again, they initiate another cycle. The important characteristic of this pump is that both sodium and potassium ions are moving from areas of low concentration to areas of high concentration. That is to say, each ion is moving against its concentration gradient. This type of movement can only be achieved by the constant expenditure of ATP energy.
All right, that might help you understand what active pumps are too and how that works, sodium-potassium pumps. Okay, moving along then. Also, ATP powers movement, providing the energy for the motor proteins that contract muscle and power the movement of the cilia and the flagella. Energy from ATP powers the synthesis of also proteins and responses to chemical signals at the cell surface. So, ATP is used to carry out active transport, provide energy to the cilia and flagella for movement, the synthesis of proteins, and response to chemical signals. So ATP is not a good molecule for storing large amounts of energy over a long period of time. It is more efficient for cells to keep only a small supply of ATP on hand. Cells can regenerate ATP from ADP as needed by using the energy in foods like glucose, carbohydrates, macromolecules. So objective 1 would describe the role of ATP in cellular activity. ATP can easily release and store energy by breaking and reforming the bonds between its phosphate groups. This characteristic of ATP makes it exceptionally useful as a basic energy source for all cells. So, objective 2 is to explain where plants get the energy they need to produce food. So a quick review of some terms that we learned earlier: heterotrophs and autotrophs. Organisms that attain food by consuming other living things are known as heterotrophs. Some heterotrophs get their food by eating plants. Other heterotrophs, such as a cheetah, obtain food from plants indirectly by feeding on plant-eating animals. Still other heterotrophs, such as the mushroom, obtain food by decomposing other organisms. Organisms that make their own food are called autotrophs. Plants, algae, and some bacteria are able to use light energy from the sun to produce food. The process by which autotrophs use the energy of sunlight to produce high-energy carbohydrates that can be used for food is known as photosynthesis. So, that's where plants get energy they need, and we'll talk more about that too. Just a little taste. So objective 2 was to explain where plants get the energy they need to produce food. In the process of photosynthesis, of course, plants convert the energy of sunlight into chemical energy stored in the bonds of carbohydrates. And a review of our objectives is to describe the role of ATP in cellular activity and also explain where plants get the energy that they need to produce food. And if you ever heard of Khan Academy, he does a very nice job on the ATP video. You may want to watch it. It just gets some more information on how ATP works. You can go to my content folder and click on the link in the PowerPoint. I would play it here, but it's 15 minutes long at least, so I'm not going to. But you can go to the content folder and click on the PowerPoint, this PowerPoint at the very last slide, almost the last slide, and you can watch it yourself. Or Google it. YouTube it. And here is, ooh, gosh, that really hurts my eyes. Take a look though.